It never starts as a big fight. It starts with something small, a comment, a charge, a question that shouldn't matter that much. And then something shifts. The tone changes. The response comes out sharper than you expected. You feel it immediately. This is bigger than what just happened. And within seconds, you're not talking about the thing anymore. You're reacting to each other, defending, explaining, pushing back. And it doesn't make sense because nothing about the moment explains the reaction. But the reaction isn't coming from the moment. It's coming from the pressure behind it. Because when money feels tight, small things don't stay small. They start carrying weight. It shows up in moments that don't seem important enough to matter. A small purchase, a quick question, a comment about something you weren't planning to think twice about. And for a second, everything feels normal. Then something tightens. You hesitate before responding. You notice the other person's tone shift slightly. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, but it's there. And it keeps happening. Conversations that used to feel automatic start requiring more awareness. You choose your words more carefully. You explain things you normally wouldn't explain. You start anticipating reactions before they happen. And without saying it out loud, both of you begin adjusting. Small decisions start carrying weight. Simple questions start feeling loaded. And the more it repeats, the more noticeable it becomes. You feel it in the pauses, in the way conversations take longer to start, in the way they end faster than they used to. And eventually, something small turns into something bigger, not because of what was said, but because of how it was received. And once that happens, the conversation shifts. You're no longer talking about the situation, you're reacting to each other, defending your position, explaining your intent, trying to correct something that didn't feel like it needed correction a moment ago. And afterward, it feels confusing, like the reaction didn't match the moment, like something escalated without a clear reason. So the natural conclusion is that communication is breaking down, that patience is lower, that something between you is getting worse. But that's not where it starts, because what you're reacting to isn't just the moment in front of you, it's the pressure sitting behind it. And once that pressure is there, it starts changing how even the smallest interactions feel. What's actually happening isn't about the argument itself, it's about how meaning gets attached to small moments when money feels tight. Under normal conditions, a small decision stays small. It's just a choice. It doesn't carry anything extra with it. But when financial pressure increases, that same decision starts representing more than itself. A simple purchase becomes a signal. A comment becomes a judgment. A question becomes a challenge. Not because anyone intended it that way, but because the margin for error feels smaller. When money feels stable, mistakes feel manageable. When money feels tight, mistakes feel costly. And once that shift happens, your brain starts compensating. It scans for risk. It looks for potential problems. It tries to prevent things from getting worse, and that changes how you interpret what the other person does. You become more sensitive to tone, more aware of implications, more likely to read into something that normally wouldn't matter. And the other person is doing the same thing. So now, both of you are reacting to more than what's being said. You're reacting to what it could mean, what it could lead to, what it might cost. And that's where the escalation begins, not in the words, but in the weight those words are carrying. Because once small moments start representing bigger risks, they stop being small, and every interaction starts moving through that filter, whether you realize it or not. Once that filter is in place, escalation happens faster than it should. You respond to the meaning behind what was said, not just the words themselves. So a simple comment gets answered with a stronger tone. That stronger tone gets interpreted as a problem, and within seconds, the conversation is no longer grounded in the original moment. It's reacting to the reaction. Each response carries a little more weight than the one before it. You try to clarify, but it comes out like defense. They try to explain, but it sounds like justification. And now, both of you are trying to correct something at the same time. That overlap creates friction, not because either of you is trying to create conflict, but because you're both responding to pressure that isn't being said directly. And the faster it happens, the harder it is to slow down. Because once the tone shifts, your brain switches from understanding to protecting your position, your intent, your role in the situation. And when both people are protecting at the same time, the conversation can't stay small. It expands automatically. What started as a moment becomes a pattern, and what should have passed quickly turns into something that lingers, not because it was important, but because it was processed under pressure. After it happens a few times, it stops feeling like a one-off reaction and starts becoming a pattern. You begin recognizing how certain moments usually go. A type of question leads to a certain tone leads to a predictable response, and once you start expecting the reaction, you adjust before it even happens. You say less, or you say things differently. You soften your wording. You avoid certain topics altogether, not because they're big issues, but because you know where they tend to lead. And the other person is doing the same thing. So now, both of you are managing the conversation before it starts, trying to keep things from escalating, trying to stay within a range that feels safe. But that effort changes the interaction itself. It removes spontaneity. It replaces it with awareness. And awareness, when it's constant, creates tension. So even when nothing is happening, it feels like something could happen. And that's what makes the pattern stick. Not the arguments themselves, but the anticipation of them. Because once both people are adjusting around the same pressure, the relationship starts operating inside that pressure by default. And at that point, it's no longer about individual moments, it's about the system those moments are happening inside. As the pattern settles in, it starts changing how you show up in ways that don't feel obvious at first. You become more careful with what you say, more selective with what you bring up. You start filtering your reactions in real time, not just to avoid conflict, but to avoid triggering the pattern you already recognize. And that filtering doesn't stay contained to difficult conversations. It spreads. You hesitate more before making suggestions. You second-guess small decisions. You start checking how something will land before you even say it. And over time, that changes the tone of the relationship. Not because there's constant conflict, but because there's constant awareness of it. What used to feel easy starts feeling managed. What used to feel natural starts feeling controlled. And the more you adjust, the more that version of you becomes automatic. You're no longer just responding to the moment, you're responding to the possibility of what the moment could turn into. And that shift affects both people. One becomes more cautious, the other becomes more reactive to that caution, and without realizing it, you're both shaping the interaction in ways that make it harder to stay relaxed even when nothing is actively wrong. This is usually where it gets misunderstood, because what you feel is frustration, distance, and shorter patience. It's easy to assume the problem is emotional, that one person is becoming more reactive, that the other is becoming more withdrawn, that communication is breaking down. And those explanations seem to fit because they describe what's happening on the surface, but they don't explain why it's happening more often or why it started in the first place. Because the behavior you're seeing isn't random. It's a response to pressure that's already shaping how both of you process each interaction. You're not just reacting to each other, you're reacting to what each moment might cost, what it might lead to, what it might mean about the situation you're in. So when a small moment escalates, it feels like a personal issue, like something about the relationship is failing. But what you're actually seeing is a structural response. The relationship isn't just reacting emotionally, it's adjusting to a condition that changes how everything is interpreted. And when you try to fix it at the surface level, by improving communication or trying to stay calmer, you're working on the reaction, not the cause, which is why it keeps repeating even when both people are trying to handle it better. So it never really feels like the argument started for a good reason. It feels like something small turned into something bigger than it should have. And that part is true. But what's missing is why it keeps happening the same way. Because once money starts carrying more pressure, every interaction starts carrying more meaning with it. A small moment is no longer just a moment. It becomes a signal about control, about responsibility, about whether things are stable or not. And once that meaning is attached, your reactions change automatically. You respond faster, with more weight, and with less room for things to pass naturally. The other person does the same thing, and that's what turns something small into something bigger. Not the situation itself, but the pressure moving through it. And until that pressure is recognized, it keeps shaping how both of you interpret and respond to each other, which is why it feels like the relationship is becoming more difficult, even when the moments causing it seem insignificant, because they're not being processed as small moments anymore. They're being processed